This year, we once again have the opportunity to organize ESDC back at Robert College. In the same exact auditorium where ESDC's first opening ceremony was held 5 years ago. Today, we're honored by the presence of representatives from the organizations that have supported us along the way, İBB Gençlik Meclisi and Bezmi Alem University. It was a real pleasure to be able to host all of you, looking back at the unforgettable memories of the past 5 days. And we would like to thank you for being here and deciding to be with us for these 5 days. Now, for this year's grand final, our adjudication panel consists of Scott Ralston, Kip Oebanda, Branislav Pechko, Kulina Bashli, Barışcan Göç, Phil Legas, Irina Corey. On the proposition side, we have Team CIS. Team CIS consists of the following speakers: John Yap, Ji Min Kang, Sophie Lee, Darren Ton, and Nicholas Malone. On the opposition side, we have Team South Africa. Team South Africa consists of the following speakers: Emilia Warren, Elon Malkin, Kate Dewey, Desmond Farrell, Stephen Lochner. The motion for the grand final of ESDC 2015 reads: this House believes that Western liberal democracies should pay reparations for women. We now invite the first speaker of the proposition to deliver the Prime Minister's speech.
What do you mean? For 16 years, I have been told that the glass ceiling has been broken. For 16 years, I have been told that women have achieved equality in the workplace. For 16 years, ladies and gentlemen, I have been told a lie. Today, Team Proposition believes that if women continue to be treated as liabilities in the workplace, we are never going to achieve equality. We believe that women deserve equal pay for equal work and that they deserve equal opportunity, and that reparations are a justified means to correct the corporate culture that has systematically oppressed women until today. As the first speaker, I'll be telling you about why we are guilty, what reparations are and how money solves the problem, and last but not least, how our mechanism is justified. My next speaker will then be going on to talk about how our model will level the playing field and how it will change cultural and social culture. So now, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, why are Western liberal democracies responsible? Historically, women have been oppressed by our societal and cultural construct. Women have traditionally been seen as belonging to the home. They have traditionally been seen as primary caregivers. And this biological makeup has been reflected in company policies. We see women being considered as liabilities, right? When they get married, when they have to take maternity leave, when they give birth, we see companies enact policies that are remarkably resistant to change. We see them continue to entrench this societal bias where women cannot achieve the same level as men in the workplace because of something they cannot change. And what is even more problematic, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is an entrenched problem. Our fathers, our uncles, our friends, and even our sisters all perpetuate it because women are internalizing this discrimination and we are not doing anything to reverse it. Today, we claim that we have reached equality, that women now have the ability to roam free. But in fact, the barriers are still there and they are just invisible. How does this work? We see Western liberal democracies as being hypocritical. They condemn the oppression of women overseas, but back home, they perpetuate this discrimination in their workplace. We see women as being overrepresented in lowly paid fields and underrepresented in highly paid work. We see 70% of people in minimum wage jobs in the UK as being women. We see that in low-paid jobs, such as nursing, as elementary school teaching, social workers, that above 80% of them are in fact women. And we see that in highly paid jobs, such as the medical field, only 9% of surgeons are women. And this number increases by 1% every 4 years, meaning it will take us 150 years to reach true equality in this context, ladies and gentlemen. We see that women experience a glass ceiling. 2% of Fortune 500 bosses are women, and women make up less than 13% of board members. We see women as being underpaid. In the USA, women make on average 77 cents on the dollar that men earn for the same work. And this is only in the US, ladies and gentlemen, the best case scenario. We also see that the working women of today are severely overworked. We do not credit them for the work they do at home, and they are expected to do more housework while balancing their jobs. Women spend on average 15 hours per week doing chores, while men are expected and actually do 5. And we see that this situation ultimately might explain why only 38% of the workforce are currently women, because corporations make these women take on double shifts and perpetuate this in their policies. So, why are corporations guilty for making the glass ceiling thicker? We see that women are told that their choices are not restricted. They are told that legislation has made the problem seem non-existent. Education is seen as being more accessible, and it is true that women are graduating at higher rates. But once they enter the workplace, the fight has already started. How? We see that corporations pose a tangible harm when they limit choice. We see that corporations self-justify the fact that they pay women less by telling them that they're unreliable. Why are they unreliable? When a woman gets married and she and her husband discuss who stays at home to take care of their newborn, who goes to work. Ultimately, it is always the woman because she is seen as being paid less. This is entrenched in policy. But why is she paid less? Because the company in itself perpetuates this idea that she is being paid less because they expect her to make the decision to stay at home. And we don't think that this is going to change without the solution we have today. So right now the problem is that we have plateaued. For the last decade, earnings for women working full-time, year-round, in a moment, have been kept at a static 77% of men's earning, and we are not doing anything to break the final barrier. Yes?
The purpose of reparations is for the current state to apologize for the actions of a past state. All of your harms are linked to society, not the actions of the government. Why should they be reparations?
Thank you. We believe the reason why women are being treated in different ways than men is because it has continued from the historical oppression we have seen. I will tell you now exactly what reparations are and what money does to solve the problem, because history continues into today, ladies and gentlemen. Yesterday becomes today. That is a reality we must face. So we see reparations as being the making of amends for a wrong one has done by paying money to those who have been wronged. And we see that women have been wronged in today's world. We see them receiving unequal pay. We tell them that they're equal, but we don't pay them equally. So, what are we going to do? We are going to tax corporations, and this amount will be based on 2 conditions. A, we will base them on the difference in median income of their employed men and women. We will also base it on the disparity in the percentage of men and women in their workplace. This money will be collected and redistributed through a progressive redistribution to women who can use this money to pay off student loans, to access daycare for their children, and obtain money for future opportunities, especially into male-dominated fields. Ultimately, though, we believe that they can do whatever they want with this money, because this money, ladies and gentlemen, is rightfully theirs. We're simply compensating them for the money we have kept from them for so many years. But we also agree that ultimately we stand behind choice. These women also have the choice to opt out of this model, right? We see that if they do, the money won't just float around into nowhere, but we will actually put this money into programs tailored to assist girls in entering male-dominated fields, because, ladies and gentlemen, we stand behind the concept of choice. So, last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, why is our mechanism justified? We tell you that corporations are inherently guilty for disadvantaging women in the workplace. We tell you that from the point in which they are recruited, there's a process called anchoring, in which the person recruiting sets a base level of wage that the person they're talking to can expect. And we see that it is entrenched in policy that women, in fact, earn less than men. So when a woman enters this job recruitment process and she is told you are worth this number, she cannot ask for more. So the company is explicitly manipulating her to ask for less than she is worth when compared to men, because they, in fact, do the same job. We also tell you that working arrangements are severely biased towards men. Women are not given flexible work schedules because the way corporations are formed are incredibly male-centric. They don't take into account the role of mothers, you don't have express rooms for breastfeeding, and also they don't have the option to take part-time work when they have this other job, this household job they're doing at home. And last but not least, we also see a problem in which women are being forced to take double shifts. And we see that companies realize that more women tend to stay at home, and therefore they don't give them the promotions because they are seen as having less utility, and we see this as a disgusting reality, ladies and gentlemen. To prove this point, we show you that in the 2008 financial crisis, companies actively fired more men than women because they saw that to save money, they kept the women who were cheaper but could also be competent but complete the same kind of work. And we think that this is the exact kind of mentality that corporations have, and today we are here to reverse that. So, ladies and gentlemen, we stand behind three principles. A, women should be paid more. B, corporations are guilty of exploitation and benefiting from women. And C, we are the ones guilty for internalizing the problem, and therefore we believe that reparations can fix that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's go for the first speaker of the House.
Ladies and gentlemen, for 18 years, I too have suffered at the social discrimination of the patriarchy, which is why I will never allow a proposition that recognizes that we still, as women, have issues today to actually propose a policy of closure. But moreover, we're really confused as to where proposition stands today. Because if it is corporations who are guilty, we ask why they're making the state pay for that guilt. If it is value for work that they want, we ask why they don't just use the status quo and make companies pay women equally. But moreover, we're still waiting for an actual explanation from proposition as to what a reparation is. So we're going to tell you what that is, and that's two things. One, it is an apology, an acceptance of guilt for past actions, and two, it is an attempt to repair damage that has been done. So let me show you throughout my case why they do neither. But first, let's get a little realistic. So here we've had a lot of emotive arguments about how women still face issues in society today and how that's problematic, which is true. But we can't just look at the issues that women face in this exact moment. We need to be more realistic. We need to be more nuanced and look at the trends in society, because we do have another trend of empowerment. 60% of all college graduates are women, and over time that is improving more and more. But moreover, in cases where that organic change is slow, we can look at status quo where we already have policies to accelerate that. Things like gender quotas in hiring, things like gender quotas in parliament, things like equal hiring. All of those things are important, and all of those things can work and are working. But moreover, when they tell us that individuals aren't following that, we say we would hold those individuals accountable when they aren't hiring women. We will hold individuals accountable when they're not paying them equally. We don't know why we can't. So what am I going to show you in my speech today? I'm firstly going to show you why neither the state nor corporations, if we assume their stance, are actually those to blame for the harms to women. Secondly, I'm going to show you why the nature of damage to women doesn't warrant paying a reparation. And thirdly, I'm going to show you why they only make this worse for the issues that women face in society. And my second speak is going to show you why this is worse for women in the workplace. But now, let's take a look at that substantive. And here I'm going to be integrating my responses, and I'll flag you as I hit each one. So let's first ask the question, is government actually responsible, and are corporations responsible? And thus, is it actually legitimate for us to obligate them to pay reparations? So here the first problem we had with their case thus far was that they essentially say that corporations are the ones guilty of entrenching these problems, and thus they would make the state pay. That doesn't make any sense, ladies and gentlemen. If it's corporations that are guilty, why are you making the state pay? Yes, sir.
The state takes money from different actors, and we showed you we're taking it from corporations, and it's not an act of closure. Can you please be specific, ma'am?
Okay, I'll talk to you more about the closure thing now. But in terms of taking money from corporations and then via government paying up for what corporations do makes no sense. Why, if you're so concerned about corporations, don't we make corporations pay directly? Why are you also using the tax of the entirety of society? That doesn't make sense. That's illegitimate. You're blaming everyone in society when you use the state's money. You're blaming the government, and that's problematic. If you want to fix corporations, use status quo. Force people to break down the glass ceiling. Force them to hire women. Force them to pay equally. But now let's look at who is actually responsible for these problems that women face today. Because here what we need to understand is that the patriarchy as a social structure wasn't caused by any government. It wasn't caused by any corporation. It developed as an initial social structure at the dawn of humanity, where thousands of years ago, men were physically stronger, so they would go out to hunt, and it made sense for women to stay and raise the children and prepare the food. That social structure was then perpetuated by the rest of society, by things like religions, which way back when were clearly sexist, but moreover they were perpetuated by individuals who imposed that social structure in terms of things like their family structure. That is the current problem that women face. Those societal perceptions are the issue. Government is not to blame. Government is not to blame, but moreover, companies aren't to blame. Because let's look at what role either of those individuals actually played. Because here what we say is that they mirrored what society was already like. So for example, a government would mirror a sexist society by not allowing women the vote. A corporation would mimic a society that was already sexist by not hiring women as leaders. But ladies and gentlemen, they were reflecting the society they were in, and so they can't be blamed for that. But moreover, we need to draw a distinction between governments past and government new. The very principle of democracy, for example, is that with each election, we can entirely revolutionize and entirely change our governments to a new government with different values, different principles, different beliefs. So we ask how an entirely different government could ever be blamed for something that wasn't caused by a government at all, but at best was caused by a government of the past. But now let's understand why the nature of the damage done to women doesn't warrant reparations. So here they told us about the pay gap and how that's problematic, to which we say that actually organic change is happening. The pay gap is closing. In the 70s, the pay gap was 45% difference. Now it's less than 5 and it's closing at an exponential rate. But moreover, if we're looking at the pay gap, we say that reparations are drastically the wrong tool. Because where the pay gap exists is when men and women are serving different roles in corporations. Why? So the woman, as they've told us, will be a nurse, and the man, let's say, a neurosurgeon. So we can either use their model, in which we try to pay that nurse to get to the same extent and earn the same as a neurosurgeon, or we can use substantial change, where we actually put quotas in universities to ensure that women can become neurosurgeons. I'll show you why that's mutually exclusive later. But lastly, we say that if we're looking at economic damage, the nature of it being a woman is an arbitrary characteristic. Unlike a uniform group of being black, where your entire history was that of slaves, there we can draw a direct economic damage. However, with women, the economic damage language of the patriarchy varies greatly from social groups, why are you implementing a blanket policy that assumes all women suffer the same when clearly they don't? And in terms of their social harm, I'm going to get onto that right now and show you how they're only making this so much worse for women, and they drive the cause of equality for women so far backwards. So the first reason this is a problem is because they essentially pay away the problem, and this is why their policy is mutually exclusive to other alternatives, because they've accepted that women still face problems within society and are still discriminated against socially. So why is paying a reparation the worst idea? Because the nature of a reparation as something that is about an apology, as something that is about the past, because when we look at when reparations are paid in society, it's after an event, it's after the fact, says that the issue of women's issues are over. But secondly, it tells society that they've already done their part. They've paid to correct the issues in society. They don't need to worry anymore. And so in that way, society can close the chapter on women's rights in the same way we've closed the chapter on World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, they're the side that silences women's movement, that silences government and makes it harder to fight for women's rights because society thinks it's already been achieved. But moreover, they shift the blame of sexism in society. Because we say that sexism is a problem that's perpetuated by individuals in society. So when government pays a reparation, they say it's us as the state, not you corporations, not you individuals, it's us who caused the problem. We're paying reparations because we're guilty. So that enables both corporations and individuals to say that it's not them that created sexism or are creating sexism today. Their role is irrelevant in comparison to how much damage governments have done. So, by comparison, there's really no need for them to change what they're doing because government's the real harm. But moreover, we see they're actively worsening sexism. Because when the government throws money at women, it sends the perception that they're weak, that they need government help. They can't earn money by themselves by breaking down employment barriers, but they must just have that money given to them. When the perception of weakness is the very reason the glass ceiling exists, because men don't believe that women can lead, we ask why they worsen it. Ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that they're illegitimate in obligating government to pay this. We tell you that they're illegitimate in their tool of a reparation, and we tell you that they make it so much harder for women to fight for their rights, they're going to lose this debate.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to call on the second speaker of the report.
Side opposition is telling us that the only solution to solving this problem is to wait it out. And we firmly disagree on side proposition. We say that in the United Kingdom it takes 150 years to reach male and female parity, that this kind of solution, this kind of apathy is unacceptable. We take the stance that as long as women are viewed as liabilities, then they're going to suffer in terms of promotion, in terms of employment, in terms of pay. And it forces these women into motherly professions, low-wage professions, professions like nursing, professions like preschooling, professions like care. And these are artificial barriers that we believe side opposition is trying to endorse. Now, before I move on to my substantive about the different lenses of change that will be occurring as a result of our model, I want to look at some of the problems that side opposition has been trying to bring up in this debate. Now, first of all, they talk to us and they say that the trend of wage gap is closing, and that if we wait it out, we'll be just okay. And we say, ladies and gentlemen, no. We said in our problem, and we'll say it again, that the wage gap did close very much in the decade between 1960 and 1970, but after that, it's been stagnating. It's been stagnating ever since. No thank you, ma'am. And it's been stagnating because we believe that the fight for equality is over. It's stagnating because we believe that there is no problem anymore. And we say, ladies and gentlemen, that ignoring the problem like this actually exacerbates it, right? They claim that we're placing undue pressure on the government because it's actually the fault of corporation. Well, we say, ladies and gentlemen, side opposition really should have been listening when we talked about our model. We said we're going to be taxing corporations on a firm-by-firm basis. If a corporation has egalitarian policy, if a corporation pays men and women equally, if a corporation hires an equal amount of men and women, then they don't get taxed. But if we see a highly misogynistic corporation, a corporation that actively fires men because they're more, but they do the same work as women, a corporation that actively uses anchoring to as an excuse to pay women less, then these corporations are the ones that are being taxed. And the money from this taxing goes into this reparation. And so we say we don't understand when they don't understand our model, because we believe it's incredibly clear. When they talk to us about how we're going to be worsening sexism by saying women are weak, we're saying no, right, ladies and gentlemen. We're saying that women are already being discriminated against, and we say that because it's a firm-by-firm basis, they're being discriminated against on an equal level, and so when we give them back that equal amount of reparation through a progressive reparation system, which they haven't responded to, no thank you ma'am, then, right, we're giving them exactly the leg up that they have been denied. We are reducing the negative externality, we are reducing sexism, and we are making sure that they get the money, they get the disposable income that they deserve. More on that in my substantive. Right? When they're talking about how the patriarchy is a social structure, no thank you. They're talking about the patriarchy existed long before, right? And they're saying that we can't blame the government because they were just acting on the social norms of their time. If we extrapolate this logic, should Hitler pay reparations for the Holocaust simply because there is an anti-Semitic ideal then? Should we say he didn't really do all of these things because it was only the societal perception that was influencing his mind? No, right? We believe that the societal perception is things that needs to change, and by having a market-based solution that will actually not just agree, no thank you ma'am, that there is a problem, but also actively solve it in the process, something they have again not responded to, by making women more attractive to hire, and by making it more attractive for our companies to be egalitarian. By doing this, we will be able to not only acknowledge that there is a problem, and we will also be able to solve it. And we say that on their final point of how we're going to believe that the problem is already over by saying we're paying reparations and it's over already, we say no, because this is an active solution. This is a solution that will continue to work until the pay gap is closed. So on to my substantive, right? What we're talking about is the lenses of change. And I'm going to say that our stance is that we're going to try and create equality on multiple levels. No, thank you. Right? We're going to say this equality is going to be real and it's going to be substantial. I'll be examining this through 4 lenses. First of all, the individual lens. Second, the corporate. Third, the government. And finally, the societal. Right? So first of all, on this individual level, right? We're saying by increasing the disposable income of women because it has been decreased by the misogynistic practices of corporations, then what we're doing is this disproportionately biased thing that has happened, this disproportionately biased misogyny that has happened throughout history and even in the status quo today, we'll be paying them for the undervaluation of the work that they do already, right? And so when we say we stand behind the value and rights, we're saying this is going to positively benefit both kinds of women. What are the 2 kinds of women? They're the women who are aware, right? The women who are fighting against this misogyny. The women who believe that there is a problem and believe that they are feeling a very strong difference. And we say we're giving them what they're asking for. We're giving them what they deserve. We're giving them the pay that has been unjustly taken away from them, and we are making sure that they are going to be equal in society. But this second kind of woman, this woman who is unaware, this person who has internalized this misogyny, the person who believes that there is no problem anymore, we say that, well, we can also change her view as well. We're saying that by giving her a tangible difference, by saying that you have by giving her the money that has been taken away by the wage gap, we'll be able to let her feel the exact difference of this misogynistic society we live in today. We'll be able to allow her to realize her extra worth and be able to realize her real value in society. No thank you, ma'am. We're saying that these women can use this disposable income to say spend on a babysitter, right, so that they can do more work and pursue their dream, or even just go to the spa because they deserve it, because ultimately this is disposable income that they deserve, right? And this is giving them the choices that for education, giving them the choices to pursue their dreams of full-time jobs. This is allowing them to seek out full-time jobs. And we say, ladies and gentlemen, not only will it allow them to seek out full-time jobs, but our model will also encourage corporations to hire them for full-time jobs. Perfectly leading me on to my second lens of the corporate level. Now, we've already talked to you about this vicious cycle, right? That women need to be in the home and therefore corporations pay them less, which means they need to be in the home again. Now, we're saying that we're breaking this cycle by changing the cost-benefit analysis of families in the discussion of who stays at home, right? We know because of the man session, right, where more men were disproportionately fired, that while these companies are misogynistic, they ultimately place their profit above their misogyny. And when they prioritize this profit, that means that given this tax-based, market-based solution, they will be incentivized to pay more women, to hire more women, and they'll be incentivized to pay them equally, right? And what this does is this shatters the glass ceiling. When there are more women in a corporation, no thank you, sir. Furthermore, we see promotion increasing, right? We're going to see more women as managers, more women as CEOs. We're going to change the statistic of all this misogynistic practices that have been happening that my first speaker has already laid out. Yes?
If firms think that they're already paying for these women women's salaries, then how is this going to be likely in an increased position?
Yeah, well, sir, what you don't seem to understand is that we are taxing them, right? We are providing a negative incentive towards paying these women less. And so the more they pay the women, they lessen pay in tax, and because it is disproportionate, they will be saving money in the long term. And this is how we create long-term change. And ladies and gentlemen, we applaud the day when our model no longer needs to be in effect. Right? And so when we create this top-down change by having more women as managers, by having more women implement policies that are beneficial towards women, like more flexible hours, like more professional training for women, then we're going to create lasting corporate policy and change. Right? Finally, on this idea of, and next on this idea of government, right? We're trying to give more credency, more legitimacy, more weight towards the condemnation that we give towards people like the Turkish President Erdogan, who says that women's place is in the home. Places like Saudi Arabia, where women's rights are being over and over again. We're putting our money where our mouth is, ladies and gentlemen, and we're involving women in government, and this is not tokenistic, because we are doing it proportional to the amount that they are being persecuted in our society. Finally, on this idea of societal change, we're saying this motion is taking place in a generational time period, over a long-term time period, and we're going to look at this through the eyes of the youth, right? We're applaud the day that our tax becomes irrelevant, right? When we turn what we're saying into what we're doing, right? Because in the status quo, there is an ideal of learned sexism, where little boys and girls automatically identify women as different than men, as weaker than men, when in the exact same position. When we say there's a 50-50 spread between stay-at-home parents, doctors, engineers, nurses, secretaries, presidents, this eliminates sexual bias. So ladies and gentlemen, today we stand for 3 principles: that women and men should be paid equally, that we don't believe in active exploitation of women, and that misogyny has no place internalized in the mind of women. And we say these principles are codified in our Constitution, they are ratified by our Western liberal democracy leaders and in rhetoric, and it's time to make them present in our practices. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the reason that side proposition, despite their entrance song, will not survive today's debate is because they amazingly don't understand what the definition of a reparation is. Because we're not just talking about upholding anti-discrimination laws that we already have within society. We're not just talking about quota systems, and we're not just talking about upholding the values that Western liberal democracies already have. We're actually talking about creating some sort of change, and reparations specifically and definitionally have to apologize for something that the state has done in the past. And that was why it was really strategically bad for them to not respond to any of Kate's analysis about why this government doesn't necessarily have an obligation and about why this government didn't actually cause the harm. Because here's the difference. Hitler created a lot of concentration camps and killed a lot of people through his leadership. But the governments that didn't give women the vote, and the governments that didn't give women opportunities in terms of education, didn't actually create those problems. They were literally just responding to a society which had always perpetuated those problems from when governments even didn't exist from the very beginning of time. In my speech, I'm going to be speaking about women in the workplace, and if that is what we care about the most, why they specifically make that worse. No, thank you. But before I do that, let me get on to some explicit rebuttal. And the first thing that we have to talk about, ladies and gentlemen, is the idea of organic change, because they've tried to push it on us that we're just waiting it out and it's going to take another 100 years for women to be treated equally again. So here is what we tell you again. In the status quo, there are very effective quota systems and anti-discriminatory legislation that are working pretty well at the moment. Obviously, the change isn't as rapid as it has been in the past years because the most obvious discrimination has begun to be rooted out, but we are still seeing a progressive change in the way that women are being treated at work. No. But the second thing that we have to analyze is what are they actually doing? Because essentially if they come forward and they're saying that they're going to tax a whole lot of corporations because corporations are evil and they always undervalue women. And the first thing that we say is that if this is the government obligation to prevent corporations from hurting women, then we're already fulfilling that obligation to some sort of extent. The second thing, though, that we have to understand is that there is a spectrum of corporations. Not all corporations are evil, and not all corporations
Exactly, ma'am.
want to hurt women. There are some corporations in the status quo that therefore don't deserve this tax, and you have to prove why they also have an obligation to women. But more than that, we have to understand that when a government takes large amounts of money from a specific corporation, the most efficient part of the economy and the central part of the economy, it means compromising that economy to some sort of extent. So it means that everyone within that society is now being detrimented at least a little bit in the hopes of upholding the rights of women. So you do actually have to respond to all of that obligation analysis. The next thing that we then have to ask is whose fault actually is this? And this is where we really need some more response. Because we tell you that the fault does not lie on the government. It is a different government that has come into power now. It is a government that didn't actually enact policies that hurt women. But more than that, even if the government is responsible for enacting policies like not letting women go to school, those are not the problems that women are facing today. The problems that women are facing today are very much perceptual. It's about how the rest of society thinks they're weak. You needed to respond to Kate's analysis about how you're legitimizing that perception, about how you're saying that women need to be paid something, otherwise they can't, possibly function in any kind of situation within that society. No, thank you. The last thing, though, that we told you is that even if we do assume that you're solving some sort of obligational problem, we still say that you're just hiding the actual issue. Because a reparation is something that happens after the fact to create the idea that the problem is over. No, thank you. Secondly, the society itself thinks that it is already paid for women to some sort of extent, so they're going to be less sensitive to this kind of sexism that they experience. Thirdly, you say it's government's fault and not the fault of individuals, not the fault of corporations, and therefore they're going to be less in tune to that kind of sexism as well. And lastly, you create a worse perception because you legitimize the idea that women are weak. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I'll take you in a moment. I'm going to go through why exactly, even if we assumed that women do currently have a problem in the workplace and it's not getting better, why they make it considerably worse. Yes?
Do you believe that women should be paid for the work they do at home?
Okay, so that's a completely different debate. If we're talking about giving housewives salaries, we don't think that you're actually going on with what the motion should be about. But if we say that we would allow women to receive some sort of remuneration for the way that they get paid at home, then we say that you're just further perpetuating the idea that the only place for women to be is at home, and you're legitimizing that kind of concept anyway. So now let's get to women in the workplace. And here we needed to actually understand some nuance. Because the problems that women are facing are not just that they don't get the same amount of payment at the end of the day as men. It's that they don't feel as valued, or that their contribution to the workplace is as valued as it is of men. Because giving people money is also symbolic of how much you value that person's contribution. So it's really important as an individual to feel that you're valued in what you do every day, but more than that, we need to send the message to everyone that men and women are equally valuable, not just paying them the same amount. So you prevent that from happening in two ways. Firstly, from the point of view of companies, and here we need to understand that there are two broad groups of companies. Firstly, the group of companies that already does feel some sort of obligation to women. So these are the companies that are actually acting on the anti-discriminatory legislation. For them, we say that you make it considerably harder for them to continue to enact these kind of policies. Why? Because usually these policies, when they start up, are relatively inefficient and difficult for a company to do without losing some sort of profit. Now, assuming that your policy is effective, you are taxing them massively and making it really difficult for them to continue with that kind of legislation and that kind of policy. It's really difficult to sell to your shareholders that we should also enact women empowerment policies if you as a corporation are already being taxed a whole lot. But more than that, for the corporations that currently don't feel any obligation and currently are feeling evil, or are currently not being actively persuasive in terms of helping women, we say that to them you make them actively hostile. Why? Because these are the kind of corporations who will now make a direct link between seeing women and feeling that they are the inefficiency within that company. It is much easier for a company who believes that women are inherently unable to do work properly to just be taxed than it is for a company to hire women who they believe are inefficient. So all of that analysis doesn't stand, but you specifically make the idea of women synonymous with the idea of something that is ineffective in the workplace. You breed that kind of hostility. You make it harder for women to break into the workplace. But lastly, from women, you make negotiation that much more difficult, because you cannot negotiate for an equal salary if you have no evidence of why that salary isn't equal. if you have to approach your boss with the idea that you don't feel like you're being adequately represented, if you don't feel like you have enough power in the workplace, but you don't have any figures to fall back on, that makes that negotiation process much harder. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, you undermine the woman in the workplace who we want to celebrate the most. Because when you group every single woman into one group in society, you tell the woman that every single woman is a victim, has to take on the identity of the victim, then you move away from the types of women who we've seen breaking out of that stereotype. The types of women who have actually achieved a lot of status and a lot of power in society because you force that identity of victimhood on them. And that is stripping them to the collective identity that we specifically don't want for women in society. Society wants to get away from the idea that women are children and always need to be helped. We should celebrate the women who spent all their lives trying to get into a position of power and moving away from the perception that they're victims. Ladies and gentlemen, a patronizing patriarchy is still a patriarchy. It's just one that denies dignity. I'm proud to stand for side opposition.
Thank you very much. And as I recognize the third speaker,
It is ironic that second speaker from opposition comes up and tells us how much backlash, how much resent women will get from, and how difficult any kind of regulation will work, and then yet choose to sit on their bums and not implement something drastic to change the situation. They told us how, they will resent this new addition, they will resent this new wage negotiation, and yet they say, wage negotiations actually have been working, we'll get there sometime. We told you 150 years in the UK for surgeons, they said, so what? We told you college graduations has been going up, college grades have been going up, but employment has still been stagnating, they said, so what? They're the team that would sit down on their bums and watch women suffer under the hands of corporations simply because they think the problem is not big enough. But what annoys me more, ladies and gentlemen, is that we worked to 2:30 a.m. last night to create a good model for opposition that they have simply ignored today, ladies and gentlemen. We gave you specific problems and specific solutions on why we will go and tax and fine corporations individually based on that corporation's inequality in race and inequality in gender mixes and inequality in gender pay, why we will put that to a centralized fund, and why because we identified clear guilt, we can do this fines and we can give reparations and compensation to women, and they simply said, this blanket policy. What blanket policy, ladies and gentlemen? We gave you the most specific policy we could think of, and we worked so hard for this. We really want them to respond, ladies and gentlemen. So if we're talking about, no thank you, you can respond in your third speech. We think today there are a few clashes we need to talk about, right? Firstly, this idea of a definitional challenge in the finals debate, really? But we'll look at that. Secondly, which stakeholder is responsible and are we fulfilling our burden today? Thirdly, what message do we send to the public about women? And fourthly, do we solve the problem? Now, on the first issue of the definitional challenge of reparations, we checked the dictionary, we looked at this. Reparations are basically giving compensation for an act or an act of abuse and a harm that we do to an individual. We say we see the present harms that we do to women as historical, but we also see them manifesting currently. And that's why we propose to you a system where we give continued reparations until the problem stops. We say every year we'll evaluate the kind of harms that are being done to women, and we'll fine corporations respectively and pay it back to women what they deserve. We think that this is completely fine, this is no issue with that. So let me move on to the more interesting area. Which stakeholder is responsible? Now they came up here and said, it's not the state, it's not corporations, it's just evolutionary. It's evolutionary that women are disenfranchised, right, ladies and gentlemen? And that somehow, because the government was influenced, because the electorate was influenced, we don't have to bear any guilt. For God's sake, right? Is Hitler innocent because he acted on anti-Semitic attitudes in the area at the time? Obviously not. Is apartheid in Africa justified because they acted in racist attitudes of that time? Obviously not, right, ladies and gentlemen? Just because you were acting in line with societal beliefs does not mean you were not active in perpetuating that belief. It does not mean you were not active in making others suffer because of that belief. And we think if we can find guilt for that, we can punish you for it, and we can redistribute the wealth to those who are punished. No, thank you. We say that do corporations do this? Yes, they anchor women's wages far lower than men's wages. They have work policy that actively discriminate against women, create criteria that only men can fill, and then say men are more efficient and hire them only. We think that these are active guilt, and these are the reasons we can make them pay. We say corporations are guilty. Then they try to draw a distinction between this idea of the state and the corporation. They said the government's not guilty, they shouldn't pay. For God's sake, right, the state gets money from somewhere, right, ladies and gentlemen? The state is not its own entity, and today we showed you that corporations are guilty. The state can take from the corporations and pay reparations. But why the corporation, right? We say that unequal workforce is the result of historical injustice. But more than that, we say in today's area where women have somewhat in political enfranchisement been progressing, we say that workforce is the last major form and manifestation of women's repression. We say it's the pinnacle of women's repression, and that's why we need to deal with it. Also because once we deal with it, it spills over into other things. It spills over into social norms. It spills over into life choices that a woman can make. It spills over to the woman's ability to be independent from any man, right, ladies and gentlemen? And we think that this is why we are targeting the last remaining huge barrier to women's rights, and that's why we're targeting corporations today. We think that this is absolutely justified. Then let's look at the second clash. What message do we send to women? They came up here and they said, no thank you, that this sends some kind of nebulous message that women are all weak. We say this is not simply the case, right? Why? Because we're not finding corporations on some kind of nebulistic speculation, right? When we find corporations, we look directly at the disparity. We identify directly the inequality. We show a direct harm, and therefore, since it's quantifiable, since it's true that you are being paid less, we simply redistributing it so it's fair. We are not saying you are inherently weaker. We're not saying you deserve more pity. We're saying you deserve what you deserve. If we can show why for the same labor, you're getting paid less, we redistribute it to you, we respect your labor, we respect your rights, right, ladies and gentlemen? Furthermore, we say if individual women feel like they're independent, that they don't need the help of money, we gave you an opt-out model, right? And we say that's completely fine because it's another form of feminist expression. It is just you saying, I am independent, and we allow you to do that, and we take that money and we redirect it to other social programs for women who need that even more. We say that there is no issue in this regard for A, an objective message that says women are weak, or B, when individuals feel like they are weak, right, ladies and gentlemen? We say we tackle both those issues. Lastly, they said, corporations feel like they're paid, no thank you, for discrimination, they can get away with it. We say that's simply not true, right? Because our reparations continue. They continue as long as there is inequality in your workforce. As long as you're not treating women equally, you will be continually fined and you'll be continually prompted to change your actions. We don't think they can feel like they've wiped their hands clean, but rather we say corporations will want to hire women more. As we see after the financial crisis, when you give them market incentives to do so, and you take away this perceived advantage of hiring men, they will change this action. They will not simply say, I can wipe my hands clean because we hurt their pockets directly. Which leads me very beautifully onto my next point. Right? Oh, before that, they gave us this last idea that men will resent women. Right? That will be some kind of cookie mode affirmative action argument. We say so what on the first level, right? So what if they resent women because we give them tangible benefits immediately by including them in the workforce. But secondly, we think with professional conduct policies, women cannot simply be bullied. We already have laws on this and legislation on this, and we think it's not mutually exclusive. But more than that, we say in the long run, when we create structural change, where there are indeed more women being hired because corporations are trying to alleviate this kind of tax, people will realize that women are not inherently more unqualified. They'll realize that women are valuable for people in the workforce. And as we told you, including women more in society will increase UK's GDP by £2.5 billion. We think that this is new economic opportunities, it is new economic benefits, it will be a short-term problem, growing pains for the long-term good that we do to society. But lastly, do we solve the problem? And today we think they've been far too dismissive of my second speaker's argument, right? Because we told you that regulations don't work. We used the example of college graduates, where women are graduating more, are graduating high grades, and yet work positions, work promotions, pay are all stagnating, right, ladies and gentlemen? And that's why we said enough is enough. We give you a market-based solution. We give companies incentives with fines to change their hiring practices, to include women in their workforce, and to give them real solutions that change this wage gap disparity, change the corporate culture, and allow them to incorporate women into the corporations. We think they've been far too dismissive with that. Today we think that because opposition has simply sat on their bums and said we will not address this issue, and because we showed you effective means of dealing with this issue and market-based principles, and secondly because we showed you it's justified to tax and fine corporations for the harm, active harm they're doing on women, we take this debate today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. To welcome third speaker.
Thousands of years of institutionalized female dependency through the mechanism of forced marriage, tying women to an identity entrenched by cultures that they live in. Yet the ability for us to destroy this identity is here. We have more strong independent females than ever before, and they are constantly at a rising rate. The worst thing that we can do is yet again impose another institutionalized identity of need and dependency and whininess, ladies and gentlemen. We'd say that I've never been more proud to oppose this motion. I'm going to be doing three things in my speech and analyzing three clashes. Firstly, I'm going to be talking about the harms that women face and whether or not they're in deserve of reparations. Second of all, I'm going to be talking about whether or not government has an obligation to instill this policy. Thirdly, I'm going to be talking about how this policy directly harms women in the status quo today. But let's, before we get on to that, look at the strategic burden of this debate. At best, side proposition can show you why corporations should pay reparations themselves. No, thank you. In terms of the debate themselves, they haven't actually entered it. Why is this the case? Because they're going to stop paying when the financial gap is closed. They're not dealing with the specific harm that females face, the subtle discrimination, the harassment at the workplace. The real harms that females face in society is just being covered by an idea that the only problem is the wage gap. We don't care if you went up to 2 a.m. coming up with a fancy policy. It doesn't speak to the burden of this debate. They need to show you why Western liberal democracies themselves are completely complicit in this and therefore should pay reparations. We don't think that they've given you an exact replication of their own burden. But firstly, let's look at this harm. And we're going to be answering two questions. Firstly, what is the harm itself? And secondly, does it principally qualify a reparation? No, thank you. So we have two types of harms. Firstly, we have the idea of a financial harm, things like the pay gap. Secondly, we have the idea of like a social harm. So this is the subtle discrimination that women face. This is the type of idea that Western liberal democracies are trying to change and doing it quite aggressively. So let's analyze the real world. What we told you is that organic change itself is definitely closing the gap at an increasing rate. 2014 was one of the best years for women. 60% of all MBA graduates are women. Generationally, the pay gap is continuously being cut. We have more female workers than ever before. The norms that we are having are slowly being changed, and the natural process that it's going through soon will be obsolete. We're telling you that the status quo that we already employ is specifically effective. But even if this wasn't the case, even if this organic change wasn't happening, why is it still not an obligation on individuals themselves? Why does this principally not qualify for a reparation? So firstly, we told you that being female is an arbitrary characteristic of suffering. This is something that's more uniform in terms of things like race, whereas you have a direct lineage of specific harms. Secondly, they told you that corporate life itself discriminates against women. So what we say is that corporations already pay a type of reparations when we impose quotas upon them, we impose tax breaks upon them, we already give them a direct incentive to do things like this. No, thank you. But even if they didn't employ active measures, this responsibility itself still isn't in the government in the Western liberal democracies. And if we can show that it makes corporate life worse for women, then all that we have done have won today's debate. And thirdly, we're going to be talking about in terms of an apology. So when we say that reparations should be paid for something in the past, it's an apology for something that's created. The best apology that we can come up with is an aggressive quotas and tax breaks. If we can do this in the status quo, which we have been for the past 30 to 40 years, no thank you, then what we can do is provide an active change. But fourthly, we'd say that this relies on a specific victim-perpetrator dynamic, which isn't directly accountable to the government itself. It's something that's been created throughout history, something that we think it doesn't really continue. Which brings me to my second clash, on the idea of whether or not governments have an obligation to pay this kind of reparation. So we say that this should, they told you that this should specifically be based on corporations. So firstly, what it says that states take from everyone, it isn't just their corporations, but if they're going to talk about like specifically taxing corporations, the tax money that corporations pay are the least harm that they expect. They think that if you're going to like employ, there's a direct incentive to employ women in higher positions, if they feel as if their tax money is already paying for that, then they're not going to be incentivized to do all the benefits they want. But what we tell you itself is that sexism is an entrenched historical factor. It started out from the beginning of time when strong men went out into the fields and then women stayed at home and cared for children. That progressed and entrenched through social orders, things like religion, things like society. So no, thank you. We can reasonably assume that states have a limited capacity to go against what an entire society is based upon. So if everyone thought this and this is what the society was built upon, then we'd say it would be impossible to directly contradict that. This is very different from Hitler. This is very different from apartheid. Do you want to know the reason for that? Entire societies weren't based on anti-Semitism. Entire societies weren't based on racism. Entire societies were based on gender norms. It's because the culture that's been entrenched by the society itself means that it needs to be mimicked by the governments that are in power. Secondly, and I'll take you in a second, we're going to be talking about corporations and how they pay a role. But yes?
You laud active change, but why are you protesting against our model, which is exactly that, an active change, a market-based solution?
Because what it does is it hides the real problem and it makes the people, women's life worse in the workplace. We're going to be showing that right now. So let's talk about taxing corporations. So why specifically are women paid less? So firstly, it's due to the subtle harms. It's like the gender discrimination that society faces, something which they don't attempt to change. They're only trying to change a financial gap. But second of all, it's because of these subtle harms that they're less willing to negotiate in salary negotiations. So why do you make this worse? So firstly, you don't give women an incentive to argue. If they perceive that they already have enough disposable income, then they're not going to argue for better positions. They feel like a reluctance to engage in that. Even if they want to argue, and we say that there are lots of women who do want to climb the corporate ladder, it makes the misogynistic bosses that you're talking about less likely to agree with them. Why is this the case? Because they perceive that the fact that they're already paid enough by the state and by themselves is simply enough to keep them in the positions that they are in. No, thank you. So they say that there's an incentive to employ more positions. So if they really are misogynistic, they probably don't mind. They probably don't care if they think that, oh, my tax money is already paying for this embellishment. They're probably going to be forcing individuals into exactly the same position as before. No, thank you. We don't deal with the specific harms that we want to change. So how does this policy harm women today? So firstly, we tell you that this is a blanket policy. You're giving reparations to every single woman on the basis of the idea that corporations treat the working force of women unfairly. So what doesn't this do? No, thank you. It doesn't allow for subjective suffering. So not all women want to be paid a reparation. What they tell you is that, okay, that's fine, we'll just allow them to opt out. But that's not the point. There's still a perception that every single woman in that society has a direct obligation and a direct need of the state in order to give them money. So how does this harm the type of people that they want to respect the most? What they want to respect the most are the individual women who want to climb the corporate ladder out of their own accord. They want to get into positions of power. Money isn't really a direct incentive, it's rather the fact that you want to be accomplished in exactly the same way men is. So why do you harm those individuals? Well, firstly, you force them into that conception of identity. You force them into identity of need and reliance upon the state. Men are less likely to see them as someone who can compete within the workforce. Men are less likely to see them in a perception where they are valued, especially the misogynistic ideals that you're trying to break down. So because you force women into this perception, and you force them to be chains in their own identity, you force them to be victims of their gender, we tell you that you harm the specific individuals that you're trying to change. But to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, you cannot give this debate the side proposition, because what they're trying to do is fix a problem that's only based on one individual case. They're not trying to deal with the root cause of the problem, which is subtle discrimination, and in fact, they make it far, far worse. We are extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. And we now move on to the reply speeches. I've got the reply speaker on.
Ladies and gentlemen, Proposition has lost this debate for two reasons. The first is that they stayed up till 2:30 in the morning prepping for the wrong motion. But the second reason that they've lost in today's debate is because despite that we told you that this isn't, even if we assume that their justification of what a reparation is true, they failed to engage with us on that ground. So let's look at how this debate played out. Firstly, we're going to look at the nature of a reparation and whether or not they were right about it. But secondly, we're going to look at accepting their definition, as we have been through this debate. What does this mean for women in the workplace, and what does this mean for the perception of women overall? So let's take a look at this nature of reparation. And here, their biggest mistake in today's debate was that they failed to acknowledge what a reparation is. Because a reparation is not affirmative action. A reparation is not hiring quotas. A reparation is not tax breaks for companies that do good things. That is the status quo. A reparation is specifically about the past. It's about apologizing for a past injustice. We say that the government can't apologize and shouldn't be obligated to apologize for the injustices of the past because it's not their fault. Instead, they should deal with the kinds of other alternatives we have. And they were never willing to engage with us on that ground. So we hope that maybe they do it in reply. Because we think that clearly they don't seem to like the idea of reparations specifically either. But let's say that we can pretend that that's really what a reparation is. That a reparation has nothing to do with the past and is actually only about right now. The challenge we've given you from the beginning is that society doesn't see it that way. Society sees a reparation as an apology. Society will have the perception that it's over, that this issue has been dealt with, and they've never managed to respond to that. And so, when society thinks that women no longer face issues, that makes it so much harder for us to do anything else. They focused on the pay gap alone. At best they do that, but they never deal with the social harms of women and make it impossible for us to fight that because it's mutually exclusive. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not sitting and doing nothing. We're the side that would do anything else that doesn't have these connotations so we can fix the pay gap as well as the social discrimination that women face. So what issues do women face in the workplace, and do they even fix that harm? So here they told us that they would cover the pay gap and so women get a tangible benefit. But let's think about this carefully. Because if a company is going to pay the same amount of money, whether it's via tax through government or whether it's directly to women, if they're still sexist, and we've shown you why they have that sexism, and that sexism is going to get even worse, they're always going to choose to do it via government. They're always going to choose to do it via tax. Why is that bad? Because when we're talking about how women need to be valued in the first place, in the workplace proposition, because it undermines their dignity when their boss says that you're not worth me paying you, that harm still exists. Because they will choose to pay via tax. All of your harms to dignity of women in the workplace remain and perpetuate, because now we can't fight to close the pay gap because you've implied that it's over. But moreover, we'd say that we correct the pay gap from the ground up. We told you about quotas to get women more educated. If we get more women that are surgeons, that makes a difference. We're not talking 150 years, we're talking maybe 10. But what does this mean for women overall? And here, they really needed to engage, because we told you that it shifts the burden of sexism of individuals in society who are more likely to be sexist, because it's now the fault of corporations or government. No response. We've told you that there's this perception that they've paid enough to deal with it. Yes, reparations will continue under your model, we accept that. But now women can't fight for other issues in the workplace, like harassment, because you make it seem as if the only issue women face is the pay gap. No response. If we're looking at women who have internalized their oppression, we've shown you that that means these women are just going to opt out of their model anyway, and they don't even make a change there. Ladies and gentlemen, we're the side that understands what reparations are. We're the side that understands what women's issues are in today's debate, and we're the side that fights for real change, not only the pay gap, but social change. We're the side that stands for women. We're the side that's one.
Team opposition today believes that we need to change something in the status quo. And how do we do that? Let us just sit back and rely on organic change. Ladies and gentlemen, Team Proposition in today's debate were the team that provided to you the active solution that tackles the problems of discrimination we are facing in the status quo. And for this reason, we are very proud to propose. In this reply speech, I'll ask 3 questions. The first being, what are reparations and what do they aim to achieve? The second being, who is this woman and does she deserve these reparations? Whose fault is it? And last but not least, what will happen with reparations in the long term? So in the first line, right, Team Opposition kept coming up here and tried to tackle us on this idea of reparations, and they were, they kept telling us that it's meant to be for the past, and therefore it is not justified to apply to the present. However, ladies and gentlemen, we told you from the first that the reason why policies exist today is because we had a yesterday. Because the historical and social constructs we set for women have continued into today's status quo and has entrenched themselves in the codes of conduct in the ways these corporations work. They then told us that reparations cause negative perceptions that women are weak. We told you, no, because we're balancing the wage they receive, we show you that this proves that this is only compensation for the fact that women are equally competent, that women can achieve what men can, and that ultimately that corporations recognize this fact and they are acting upon it. We also showed you that by allowing these women to achieve this equality, you're only bringing more benefit to the overall company. They also told you that, reparations shouldn't be put into place because it gives a sense of closure, and we don't want to we don't want to set this apathy. Ladies and gentlemen, they were the team that said we shouldn't be apathetic, yet they were the team that also said we should rely on organic change. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that reparations are a celebration. They're not any kind of restriction, and we believe this is why this point fell on our side of today's debate. Now, the second question of who this woman is. We told you that this is a woman who, after college, has to spend more time earning money to pay off her college debt. We told you that this is the woman who, after she gives birth, is fired for her company for being a liability. We told you that this is the woman who, during a financial recession, is actively seen as cheaper and therefore kept at a cheaper price when she can achieve the same as these men. And we told you that this woman completely deserved the reparations that we were proposing today. They told you that it is completely natural why roles are as they are, and that, at the end of the day, it all comes down to human history. But they never told us why that justifies less pay, why the fact that women are different justifies this fact, and we believe that that is a misogynistic problem that we ultimately want to solve. Now, on this question of whose fault it was, they said it was society, right? And we agree. And we were the team who showed you the logical links of how historically, culturally, and socially this social construct has moved into the corporate mindset, right? We told you that corporations actively discriminate against women when they have these anchoring policies, right? We told you they actively have policies that favor males. And what we are doing is trying to reverse that problem. And we appreciate them trying to bring up social harms in their third speech, and we don't think that they refer to it very well. Now, on the last question of who were the team with the better solution, we were the ones who said we are giving choice to these women, ladies and gentlemen. If they don't want to receive these reparations, they can opt out. We told you this from first speaker, right? We told you that harassment laws and reparations are not mutually exclusive. So we are solving this societal problem. And ladies and gentlemen, we told you that we're actively incentivizing corporations to fix the disgusting corporate culture that has defined their discriminatory policies, right? We told you that the reason why we're attacking the pay gap is because the pay gap can lead to a spillover that actually tackles social issues, that actually tackles the entrenched perception of women we have in our status quo in regards to traditional gender roles and expectations. So at the end of the day, when we are debating the contents of a sandwich, we on Team Proposition believe that if the woman is not being paid equally, and if the woman is being the disproportionate person who makes these sandwiches, we refuse to consume it. Thank you.